want to be in the picture? Come here. Come with me. Come with Timmy boy. Hi, my name's Tim. Creekside, Hearts in Motion, and I'm all in.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I'm a volunteer here at Creekside at Hearts in Motion, and I'm all in.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a volunteer at Hearts in Motion, and I'm all in.
Hi, my name's Kate. I'm a volunteer here at Hearts in Motion, and I'm all in.
Hi, I'm Danny. I'm a volunteer at Creekside with Hearts in Motion, and I'm all in.
Cheese!
Amen. Welcome. For those who don't know, Hearts of Motion is a ministry that we have that goes on during the second service, the 9:30 service. It's for children and families, kids with special needs, and there's actually a one-on-one teacher-to-kid ratio, and it's just an awesome ministry, so all those people are involved with that, and it's cool to see all the different places in the church where we can serve. I'm Joel. Nice to meet you. You probably know all me well. But Pastor Scott needed to tend to just some health issues with his dad. He's doing fine, but asked me to kind of fill in and preach today. And Jeff filled in for me, lead worship, and we just all fill in for one another. That's what the church does. But good to be here, do this. So let's get into it. You know, as I was thinking about this week, and just my life, I can't imagine what my life would be like without Christ. Have you thought about that? What if I didn't have Christ in my life? I didn't have God. I didn't have his love, his promise of peace, the freedom of grace, the gift of love, all that he gives in service for us. Have you thought about that? It'd just be a miserable experience. And I think about this mostly when I think about what the service of the church. Now, I'm not talking about a church service. I've been to a lot of great church services. I've been a part of a lot of great church services. I've heard a lot of great sermons, but that's just going to church. That's not the service of the church. And what I really love is the service of the church. I just love the church. I want to let you know why I love the church. Because I can think back when I was a kid and the teachers and the volunteers and the leaders who served me, those who took their time and their abilities to love me, to forgive me, to correct me, to teach me how to pray, how to worship, how to read the Bible. I think back to my teen years, and I grew up in churches. My dad was a church planter, and so we just had small churches that we started and we raised up. So I never had a youth pastor or a children's pastor. But I remember as a youth, people who volunteered and gave of their time. And I was thinking of one guy in particular who he worked a full-time job, long hours, but he would take time to have lunch with me, and he would take time to go and serve with him in the inner city. Like the group that I met with in high school, like my friends from church, their names were Money, Opie, and Chano. Like, I'm not kidding, like that. And this guy just volunteered, just took me to places totally out of my comfort zone to learn how to live and love other people that weren't like me. And I remember him for it. And I can think back to my early college years when I walked away from the church. Because I had some hurt, I had some pain, I didn't know how to deal with it, and so I walked away. And I remember the church never gave up on me. The church called me. The church sent me letters. The church sent me little gifts just to say, we love you and we miss you. I remember in my later college years, as I came back to the church and those who trained me and molded me and taught me, I can think of my seminary years in graduate school, how we were first married, and I have no idea how financially we made it. We were both students living, I really honestly don't remember how we ate. I don't remember how we paid for anything, but God made a way through the church. And he provided for us. And I remember people who, again, molded me and trained me, and I was allowed to preach in places I had no business preaching in. I was allowed to lead worship in places I had no business leading worship in. But people who believed in me and said, I think you can do this, so I want to throw you into the ocean and you just try. And I did. And the church ministered me in that way. I can remember coming here, straight out of seminary, almost 14 years ago, and not knowing anyone, no family, no friends, but there was the church. There was all of you. And we came here not having anything. We had everything that we owned packed into the back. Well, not everything we owned. Some stuff was in storage, but everything that came with us was in the back of a 1989 Toyota Tercel hatchback. That's all we had. And as the church gave us a short-term place to live, when our stuff did come, it gave us a place to store all of our stuff. And this is a really random thing, but it was the church that gave me a toaster. Now, this may not be a big deal to you, but it was a big deal to me. Because I owned a toaster. It was just packed somewhere in storage. And I wanted toast. But I didn't want to buy a toaster because I already had a toaster. So somebody bought me a toaster. And that was the service of the church. I remember how the church helped us move. I remember how the church helped us paint rooms. The church brought us food when we had not one, not two, not three, but 4 kids. But the greatest thing was I think about the service of the church and being a part of the church and the love of Christ is I have been able to do all of those things for other people. And that's just an amazing thing. Because when we serve others with the love of Christ as the church, it's the greatest thrill in the world. It's the greatest thrill in the world. We get to serve other people, and we get to be a part of this thing that when we're down, others serve us, and we lift one another up to be at their best. See, this is the service of the church, not a church service. Because it was Christ who gave us the church. It was Christ who gave himself up for the church, that we could carry on his service as the church to one another and to the world. The church isn't a building. It isn't an hour on Sunday. And we'll be honest, an hour and a bit on Sunday. But it's the priesthood of believers, as Pastor Scott talked about last week. If you didn't hear that message, I really encourage you to go back and listen to it. The church it's a gathering of Christians who are called out. And that's what the word ecclesia, where we get the word church, it literally means called out. We're a gathering of Christians who are called out to be imitators of Christ, to be followers of Christ. Because a very simple definition of a disciple of Christ is simply a follower of Christ. A disciple is simply a follower of Christ. When Jesus calls his first disciples in Mark chapter 1, verse 16, it says he's walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and he sees Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen, and he says, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." It says at once they left their nets and they followed him. He looks at them and he says, "I think that you can do what I do. I think there's something greater in you, so I want you to follow me, to watch how I live, to watch how I love, to watch how I move and act and I be. Just follow me." And then it goes on, verse 19 says he's gone a little farther and he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat preparing their nets, and without delay he called to them too. And they left their father, Zebedee, in the boat with the hired men, and they followed him. He said, "See you, Dad, we're going with him. We're going to follow something greater." In fact, Jesus says in Matthew 16:24, it says, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." So that's what Jesus calls us to. For those of us of believers, we have said we have given our life to Christ and we want to follow him. That's what he says. Deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. Now here at Creekside, we have a definition of disciple. It's a little bit longer, and I want to put it in front of you again because it's important for who we are and where we're going as a church. At Creekside, our definition as a disciple of Christ is one who learns to live and love like Jesus and leads others to do the same. So as we follow Christ, as we deny ourselves, pick up the cross, we follow Christ, we learn. We learn from his teaching, we learn from his behavior, from his actions, to see what he does, to see how he lives, how he loves. And then our ultimate goal is then, as Christ followers, then to lead others to do the same. Listening to his teaching, following his action. And as we look at him, as we study the life of Jesus, there's one huge theme that just screams at us when we look at his life. And that is that our God came here to earth to serve. He was a servant. He was servanthood in 3D. And he calls us, his church, his disciples, to follow his call to serve. He was fully the embodiment of servanthood. And so we look to him. Now, when Pastor Scott asked me to preach on servanthood, my first thought was, I'm just going to open up the book of Mark and read from the beginning to the end. Because that's the life of Jesus. Servanthood is the life of Jesus. It's who he was. It's what he did. And I tried that at home this week, and it took a lot longer than the time that I'm allotted. So I'm going to pare it down a little bit. But I want to take some time just to look to the life of Jesus, things that he said, things that he did, so that we can see this example of servanthood from our Lord Jesus Christ. And we see right away that he serves by both teaching and by healing his people. And if we want to open up to Mark chapter 1, we will be in Mark's gospel for quite a bit, because I love Mark's gospel. He just gets right to the point of serving people. There's no birth narrative in Mark. There's no Christmas story in Mark. He goes right to John the Baptist preparing the way, being baptized, in temptation, calling his disciples, and literally, which we just read, in just 21 verses into the first chapter, we get right to him serving his people. So Mark chapter 1, verse 21, we'll see the life and the ministry of Jesus. It said they were in Capernaum, and they went, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly, "and come out of him." And the impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. And the people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching? And with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him." And news about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Now, Capernaum is right at the top of the Sea of Galilee. So if you can picture Israel, this long slice here, there's the Sea of Galilee, and there's a Dead Sea, and the Jordan River comes and connects them. So the Sea of Galilee is towards the north, and Capernaum is just right at the north tip of the sea. And so the news starts to spread all around about Jesus and what he's doing. And so it says, as soon as he leaves the synagogue, this is in verse 29, they go to James and John, to the home of Simon and Andrew. And I want you to get this picture, because it's kind of interesting. I've had the privilege of being allowed to go to Israel and just seeing it. And I've been to Capernaum and the tabernacle there. And it's still there. You can see it. You can stand presumably where Jesus would have taught and he would have shared these things. And then about 50 feet straight across, and I don't know how they have the proof of this or whatnot, but it's where they believe the house that we're about to read is, where Peter and mother-in-law lived, and where Jesus did a lot of healing. It's the house where the two men would have come and brought their paralyzed friend, and they literally dug up the roof to drop him in because it was so crowded. So there was the synagogue where he would teach, and then he would walk just straight across to this house. And there's this big church on top of the house with a glass floor, and you can look down into it. I don't know if that's for sure where it was, but it's really interesting just to think about that he would teach in the synagogue, and he would go to this house, and he would just spend his time healing people. And so we read about some of these healings. Verse 29, verse 30, said Simon's mother-in-law was in bed, so this was her house, with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. Now, this is an interesting thing. I just want to stop and grab a point out of this passage, and that's mainly that what compassion Jesus must have to heal somebody's mother-in-law. I had to take it. Thank you for indulging me in that. No, that's not the point. But it is interesting that Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then it says she began to wait on them. And this is the NIV. Some of the other translations say she began to serve them. And as I was reading some commentaries, they said, you know, she was healed to serve Jesus and his disciples. And I get the intent of that, and I understand where they're going, but I don't think that's the wholeness of it or the full truth, because I don't think Jesus necessarily heals us to serve. But when Jesus touches us and heals our life and heals our heart, we can't help but to serve. And I think there's less about what Jesus' intent was that they would serve him, but what her response was to him. Because Jesus desires to heal all of us, to touch us, to heal us from our sin, to heal us from our hurts, our hang-ups, our habits. He wants to heal us from all of those things simply because he loves us, simply because he wants us to be whole. But in our wholeness, when Jesus heals us, we can't help but to turn and say, my Lord, my God, how can I serve you? How can I love you? We respond in service because of our love for him, that he would touch us, that he would heal us. And then he's gone from teaching to healing, and it says, then even after sunset, in verse 32, the people brought to Jesus all the sick, all their demon-possessed, the whole town gathered at the door. And Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons. So Jesus spent his whole time, morning till night, serving people, healing them, touching them, responding to their needs. And we see this throughout Jesus' life, that he has kind of this order of living, and that's simply this, that he takes time to pray, get his orders, and then he serves people. He prays, gets orders, serves people. And we see that in the next verse, 35. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he gets up, leaves the house, off to a solitary place where he prays. And it says, Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, everyone is looking for you. And there's no doubt that this would be true, right? He just healed many people, driven out demons from people, and then they're all wondering where he is because they want to see more of the same. But Jesus, who spent time in prayer, who talks to his Father, he says, here's my marching orders. He says, let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. It's why I've come. I've come not to save Capernaum, but to save the world. So let's continue to spread the word. Let's continue to teach. Let's continue to heal. Let's continue to serve. And so verse 39, it says he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. So he continued throughout the area. And it's fun being there, especially on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. You just see all of these ancient ruins of these cities, and you could just picture Jesus and his disciples just walking from place to place, teaching and healing, serving and teaching, serving and healing. And just the life that he led. He came to serve us. He came to serve people, to heal, to teach, to touch. And as he does, he teaches his disciples, and as he teaches us, that if you want to be great in God's kingdom, you need to first to learn to be a servant. If you want to be great in God's kingdom, you need to first learn to be a servant. In Mark chapter 10, starting in 32, we see Jesus and his disciples, they're heading to Jerusalem. And this is going to be Jesus' last time traveling to Jerusalem. He's going to his death. He's going to give himself over. And he has this heart-to-heart conversation with his disciples saying, I'm giving myself up. And soon I'm going to be gone from you. And he gets, really serious with them and trying to get them to understand. And then in verse 35, we get James and John, the sons of Zebedee, we get their heartfelt response back to Jesus when they say, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Okay, so maybe it wasn't very heartfelt. Actually pretty selfish. But could you imagine? Somebody just poured out their heart to you, talked about their fear, talked about their anguish, trying to get you to understand what they had to do, and you come back to them and say, hey, we'd like you to give us whatever we want. But Jesus indulges them in this conversation, and he says, well, what do you want me to do for you, he asked. And he said, well, let one of us sit at your right and other on the left in your glory. So Jesus, we know that you're the boss, you're the king, you're number one. But can we just be like number 2 and 3, or maybe like 2 and 2.5, or maybe just like a co-equal 2? Could we do that? Because we've been with you since the beginning. You called us out the lake. We left our dad. We came after you. Like, we're cool, right? And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Then later on in verse 41, it says, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. And I don't have any proof of this, but I believe punches were flown here. They're a bunch of rowdy fishermen, right? I bet you James and John, they, like, at least in the shoulder, like, they got punched. Like, there was a fight broke out when they heard about this. And so it says Jesus then comes to them, and he calms them down. He brings them together, and he teaches them. He says this, he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. So essentially what he's saying is, like, you all are commoners. You're fishermen. We're just a bunch of common people, and you understand that in this government, in this culture, in this system, in this how this world is set up, there's rulers who subdue you, and there's rulers over them who subdue them, and it's only on the top, and everybody is just pushing down. That's what life is like. That's what culture is like. But then he says to them, but not with you. Not with my kingdom. That's not how it works. That's not what it looks like. So he teaches them. He said, instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be a servant. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So culture looks like this: top, subdued, down. But my kingdom looks like this: I want to be the servant of all, to come to beneath, to lift you up. That's what my kingdom looks like. That's what my kingship will look like. That's who I am. And if you're going to follow me and be my disciple, this is what your life needs to look like. It was God here in the flesh. He could have been the greatest king. He could have assembled the greatest army and been the greatest warrior, but he chooses to be the greatest servant, to come beneath, to lift up, and he calls us to do the same. Now, another amazing thing we see in the life of Jesus is that even when he was hurting, he took time to serve others. Now, let's skip over to Matthew and leave Mark for a little bit. In Matthew chapter 14, now, the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 is in all the Gospels, but in Matthew, it gives us a greater and an interesting context to this miracle. And right before, in Matthew chapter 14, we have this story of Herod has captured John the Baptist. Because John the Baptist had called him out for marrying this woman. He said, she's bad, you're wrong for doing it. And he just calls him out. And so again, and those who lord over and push down, he said, you can't talk to me like that. And he has him arrested and he throws him in jail. But he's too afraid to kill him because he's very popular. He has a lot of followers. A lot of people know John the Baptist, so he's afraid to kill him, but he says, still, I don't want you talking bad about me, so get out of here. You're in jail. You're away from all these people. But his wife, who also he's been talking bad about, wants him dead, so he has her daughter dance for him, and he's pleased with this dancing. I don't want to imagine exactly what happened there, but he says, you can have whatever you want. And she says to him, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And so it happens. And then we come into verse 12. It says, John's disciples came and they took his body and they buried it and they went and they told Jesus. And now it's a long journey from where John was to where Jesus is, but when Jesus says in verse 13, so there's time between verse 12 and verse 13, but it says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. See, Jesus was hurt. John was his cousin. John was the one who baptized him. John was somebody who was on the same page as him. John was important to him, and he's hurting. He just lost his friend, and he lost his friend in a very brutal fashion. So Jesus goes to a solitary place. But hearing of this, the crowd follows him on foot from all the towns, because they want to see him do more. They want to touch him and see what he's doing. And it says, when Jesus, verse 14, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he said, go away, I'm hurting too badly. Is that what it says? No. It says, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. In the midst of his pain, he still served. And then right after this, when this mass of people have come to the solitary place, traveled a long ways to come see him, this is where we have the story of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, where they were far away to get their own food. So Jesus takes the small amount and he feeds the masses. Even while he's hurting, he still serves. And even when we hurt, when life is hard, we aren't called to retreat. We're called to serve. We're called to advance the kingdom. Because I want to tell you this truth. You can't come out of your pain without Jesus Christ. You can't come out of your hurt without being a disciple of Christ. And if you are a disciple of Christ, you're a follower of Christ. And if you're a follower of Christ, you are called to serve. And I want to tell you something very plainly. When we are in that deep, dark place and we're just hurting and there's nothing that we want to do but just curl up inside, probably the best thing that you can do to come out of that is to look beyond yourself and to serve other people. It's the best thing you can do. It's what Christ made us to be. It's what Christ calls us to do. Now, it's not a bad response. It's not an immoral response, but Christ wants you to come out of that pain and out of that hurting. You see, the enemy would like nothing better than to make us unable to do God's will, unable to fill his purposes, unable to continue to be a disciple and to follow him. And I think he does that in 2 ways. He either gives us a ton of stuff so we feel like we don't need God anymore, or he messes up circumstances and he brings pain into our life and wants us to hide and wither away. We need to renounce the stuff and say, God, everything is yours, but we also need to renounce the pain and say, God, I need to serve. I need to look outside of myself and to serve and to be your disciple, to continue to push forward despite my circumstances. And I believe that Jesus shows us the same thing in the same way. Now, nothing would get harder for Jesus than his time on the cross. And there's no greater act of service that he gave us than what he did for us on the cross. So on his way to the cross, he gives us this very strong example, a very strong call to servanthood. It's in John chapter 13. He's in Jerusalem. He's about to go to his death. He's about to get arrested. It's the Passover festival. He's meeting in the upper room with his disciples. And in verse 3 of John chapter 13, it says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Now, I'm sure you've heard it said before, and it would be easy to understand that this job was left to the lowest of low of all servants because feet are nasty to begin with, But after they've been walking around on dusty roads with open feet, they're just plain disgusting. And this was a job left for the lowest of low servants. And Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of Man, strips down, wraps a towel around him, bows down, and washes his disciples' feet. So he comes to Simon Peter, verse 6, said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. Peter said, no, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus said to him, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. I think essentially what he's saying is, I am trying to show you that to be great, you need to be a servant. I'm trying to show you the way of my kingdom. That if you truly want to be a part of my kingdom, if you truly want to bring my kingdom here, you need to go to the lowest spot. The lowest of the low servant spot, and you need to get underneath, and from there you can lift up. That's the kingdom I bring. That's the kingdom I'm living. And if you can't live in that kingdom, Peter, if you can't understand, then I have nothing to do with you. You mean nothing to me. Not that you mean nothing to me, that's the wrong way to say it. But what good are you to me? If you can't learn to be a servant like I'm a servant, what good are you to me? So Peter, I have to do this. And so then he goes from showing example to teaching. Because Jesus never teaches us anything that he can't do, is not willing to do himself. In verse 12, he's finished washing their feet. He puts on his clothes. He returns to his place. And he asks them, do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. But now that I, your Lord, your teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. So Jesus puts it very plainly. I have called you to serve one another. I'm showing you a way of a new kingdom, of service, of lifting one another up. And that greatest act of service came on the cross, because there's no more humiliating act than what Jesus went through on the cross. And it was his greatest act of service that he would come and say, Peter, I am serving you. I am serving the whole world. I am serving the future church by giving myself up on the cross so that you might live, that you might be empowered to serve. I am doing the ultimate act of servanthood, of humiliation, to lift the whole world up. That's what he came to do. And that's what he calls us to do. Now I want to turn to Matthew chapter 25, and this is a parable of Jesus. This is one of his teachings. I think it's an important teaching to hear and to understand as we strive to live and love like Jesus. And to serve him, because as we see that he gives his service for us, right? He washed the disciples' feet. He gave us his ultimate service, act of service on the cross. But then we give our service, and our service is for him. And really, maybe a better way to say it, it's to him. So listen to his teaching in Matthew 25. I'm going to start in verse 34. So that this king, he separated these two groups on the right and left. He says, the king will say to those on the right, come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And he responds, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he'll say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are cursed, in the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me. And they also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. They will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So there's this strange sense that when we serve one another, we also serve him. The greatest servant gave the greatest act of service on the cross, that he would be in us and that we would be in him. And together as the church, we would love the world, we would serve the world. And when we do, we serve as him, as the church, and we serve him because we serve his image bearers, his created. And I think that's a strong challenge and a mindset that we need to have, whether it be changed or just incorporated more deeply into our hearts and mind, that when we see people in need, they are the image bearers of Christ, and we need to serve. When there's a need and we're able, we need to serve. And when we have a need, we need not to hide that need. We need to be let it known to the church so the church can serve. And we do this, we serve him. We serve with him. It's a beautiful picture of what Christ has called us to do and called us to be as the church. Now, in the next 3 weeks, Pastor Phil is going to help us see that we all have unique gifts and personalities and passion. And he's going to help us find where we're just our sweet spot to serve. But I want to encourage you that wherever you are, whoever you are, if you're a Christian, you are called to discipleship. And if you're called to discipleship, you are called to servanthood. So no matter what you're called to, wherever you are called to, whatever you're doing, you're called to live the life of a servant. You're called to go beneath, to lift others up, but having the hope that you know that others and your God are beneath you, lifting you up. To give you peace, to give you glory, to help all of us be all in. That's what it would look like. Now, some of you, I want to just kind of end off with this story, and I actually shared this story as I was leading worship last week. So a lot of you might have heard it, but it's kind of sinking in deeper with me, and I think it helps me illustrate a point that I just want to push even deeper to you, and that's when I was with my kids at the beach a few weeks ago, just riding the waves. The waves totally looked like this, and I was riding them. No, they didn't look like that. That'd be really cool. I've never ridden a wave like that. But we were out there, right? And so I apologize if you heard this story, but just stick with me. And so we're out there, and as I see my kids growing up, one, it's just weird that my kids are growing up and doing different things and having different abilities. And so there was my youngest son, we go to the beach and he just kind of taps his toe in the water. He loves the water, but he runs full bore in, and as soon as he sees a wave, he's like, see ya, I'm back out here. But if I grab his hand and his dad is with him, we can push further out, and the wave crashes over him, and I just lift him up, and I help him be strong, and we go further out and further out. And eventually we get to a point where he's done. We got to go back. But he's getting braver and braver as his dad is holding his hand. And there's Cadence. I told this story. Last week was the first time that she went bodyboarding herself. And so the same thing, I grabbed her hand, and she was brave, and I carried her out further and further into the waves. And then I positioned her on the board, and as soon as a wave came, I positioned her right and just let my 5-year-old go into the ocean. I only lost her once, so she came back up. It was good. She was smiling. She was happy. And she wanted to do it again. She got braver and braver as her dad helped her out. And there was Callie, and Callie likes the medium waves. She's still figuring it out. She goes further and further. She's training to be braver and braver, and she likes to get out there and have fun. She's more brave if her dad's right there with her. But she's getting to a point where she's trying to get on her knees, and she's trying to do spins, and she's trying to do all this stuff, and she just rides to her heart's delight, and I see her getting braver and braver and braver. And then there's Karis, and Karis, she's going to be a 6th grader next year, and that's just kind of weird, but she wants to go all out there. She wants to go deep into the waves because the waves are bigger out there. Right, Kara? And it was funny because the surfer came and said, there's a shark out there, so I wouldn't go out too deep. So I looked at her and said, do you want to keep going? She's like, yeah, I want to keep going because the waves are bigger. And I don't think I've even told you this yet, Karis, but if you all saw the news a little bit ago, there was a shark that attacked a kayak. I can say words, a bunch of them. A shark actually bit a kayak right close to where we were. But we were brave. And we went deeper, and we went deeper. And this is what God wants us to do. Being in the ocean for me, it's like playing with God. It's just being in his creation. It's seeing his movement. It's feeling his movement and serving. It's a lot the same way. It's more than just admiring God. It's living and loving like God. It's being part of his movement, part of his creation, part of his action, having fun, going deeper, getting bigger waves. That's what it looks like. And we're all at different points, and we're all getting braver and braver, and we're all trying different things. But our Father is helping us go further and further, and he wants us to go. But you know what he doesn't want us to do, and you know what I don't want you to do? I don't want you sitting in the parking lot in your car watching the waves in the sunset. I don't want you doing that. Because this is what a lot of us do. I have this chair here. Pretty comfortable. It's nice chairs. Pretty new. A lot of people here today. That was a nice song. Singing along, tapping my feet. Pastor's pretty good looking. It's a good church service. I'm glad I came. Feel good about myself. This, my friends, is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. We are called to go to church. We are called to gather together. We are called to love God. We are called to hear from his teaching. But we need to be careful, because if you're this person, it is possible that you're just going to church. You're not the church. It's possible that you're just going to church. You're not the church. And I don't want you to just go to church. I want you to be the church. And that's what God wants from us. He gave himself up as a ransom for many, as a ransom for the church, that we could be the church, that we could turn this world upside down for the glory of God and building his kingdom. So I don't want you to simply admire Jesus. I want you to live and love like Jesus. Because that's what he's called us to do. It's the promise that he gave to us. It's the hope that he gave to us. It's the love that he gave to us here in the church. That we would be at our best, living and loving like him, being all in, being his disciples, serving like he served, so that his name would be great and that his kingdom would increase. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your love. We thank you for your servanthood, how you gave yourself up for us, and how you show us the way. And God, how in my deepest, darkest times, in the depths of my soul, how you came underneath me and you lifted me up. How you brought other people from the church around me to lift me up. God, I am forever grateful for that. And God, I just want to serve. And I want to see a church that has a heart to serve, to lift one another up, to be at our best, to give of our best, to see your kingdom come. So God, as the ushers are coming forward and as we come to give to you, God, would you take it even now as an act of service to you, that your kingdom would come, that you would bless this offering, that you would take it, that you would increase it, that you would help us build your kingdom here. In your name we pray. Amen.